Hey, welcome to Fatal Files. And today, we will be jumping into the idiotic deaths done by influencers. From a man who let viewers choose a secret tattoo to a graphic designer in Savannah who sat on a decorative swing that was never built to hold weight. It was March 15, 2016 in Atlanta, Georgia. The city's downtown area buzzed with late-night activity, but in the shadows of the business district stood a massive concrete parking garage, empty and silent after hours. Atticus Vale was 23 years old and worked part-time at a retail electronics store during the day. For 6 months, Atticus had been filming videos of himself performing tricks and stunts on his hoverboard, posting them across multiple social media platforms. His YouTube channel showed consistent activity with new uploads 3 to 4 times per week, always chasing the next viral moment that would push him into the upper tier of action sports influencers. Atticus had identified a downtown parking garage as the filming location for a new video. The structure consisted of multiple levels with wide open spaces and evenly spaced concrete pillars, creating narrow corridors that could be used for weaving and high-speed navigation. On the night of March 15th, Atticus arrived at the parking garage just after midnight, when the building was completely empty and security was minimal. He carried his equipment to the 3rd level, which offered the longest straightaway and the most interesting obstacle configuration. The concrete floor was smooth and clean, providing ideal conditions for hoverboard riding. Atticus methodically set up his cameras, testing each angle and adjusting the lighting to ensure the best possible footage quality. Atticus began the filming session with a moderate speed run through the course. The hoverboard moved smoothly as he weaved between the concrete pillars. Following the initial pass, he increased his speed for a second run, pushing the device closer to its maximum operating range. For his 3rd attempt, Atticus positioned himself at the far end of the straightaway, nearly 200 feet from the first concrete barrier. What the footage revealed was that this section of the garage had a subtle but measurable downward slope of approximately 4 degrees, designed for water drainage. This incline would add gravitational acceleration to his run, compounding his speed beyond what he had experienced on the level sections below. He activated his primary camera and began accelerating down the sloped corridor. The hoverboard quickly reached speeds exceeding 15 miles per hour, faster than his previous runs, with the downward grade continuing to add momentum as he approached the barrier section. At higher speed, the device began to vibrate and wobble beneath his feet as it moved beyond its stable operating range on the inclined surface. As he neared the barrier section, Atticus attempted to initiate the sharp turn around the first concrete pillar. The combination of speed, slope, and smooth concrete reduced traction, causing the wheels to lose grip and the hoverboard to slide sideways while still moving forward. He shifted his weight in an attempt to regain control, but the slide continued unchecked toward the concrete barrier. Within seconds, the collision occurred, throwing him forward off the hoverboard and directly into the pillar. The impact was captured clearly by his stationary camera. Atticus's head struck the concrete barrier with tremendous force, the sound of the collision echoing through the empty garage. His body went immediately limp, and he collapsed to the floor beside the pillar, motionless. The hoverboard continued sliding across the concrete until it came to rest against a wall, its motors still running quietly in the sudden silence. Atticus died instantly from severe head trauma caused by the impact with the concrete barrier. The investigation revealed that the hoverboard had been functioning normally and within its design parameters. Security footage confirmed that Atticus had been alone during the incident, and his own camera equipment provided clear documentation of the entire sequence of events leading to the fatal collision. Investigators determined that the combination of the sloped surface and his pursuit of high-speed footage had created the fatal conditions that night. It was June 9, 2022, in Sedona, Arizona. A tattoo studio on the 2nd floor of a small strip mall had a steady flow of weekend customers. Artists moved between appointments while music played quietly through the shop. One station, however, had drawn an unusual crowd. Sitting in the chair was 28-year-old Kieran Maddox Vale. He worked evenings at an outdoor gear store, but spent most of his free time live streaming challenge videos to a small online audience. His channel wasn't huge, just a few thousand 2,000 regular viewers, but they liked how he let chat influence what happened next. That afternoon, Kieran announced a donation challenge. If viewers reached his fundraising goal for new streaming equipment, they could choose his next tattoo. He expected something funny or embarrassing, a cartoon character, a meme, maybe an inside joke from the community. Instead, one viewer donated enough to win outright. And the request? It was something neither I nor Kieran expected. Kieran agreed before seeing the design. The tattoo artist explained that a full-back piece would require a large stencil and several sessions. Wanting to keep the surprise for his live stream, Kieran asked not to see the full layout until the stencil had been applied. Nearly 4 hours into the session, the outline was finally complete. Throughout the live stream, viewers kept guessing how big the tattoo really was. Some joked it would barely cover one shoulder. Others claimed the donor had spent enough money to cover his entire back. Kieran laughed along, admitting he had no idea because the artist had refused to let him see the stencil until it was finished. When the artist finally stepped away, he rolled a full-length mirror in front of the chair and told Kieran he could look, and witnesses said he twisted around and froze. The Empire State Building stretched almost the full length of his back, from the tops of his shoulders to just above his waist. It was far larger than anything he had imagined. I can't even imagine that kind of shock. It's like he was suddenly wearing a permanent piece of history. For a few seconds, he just stared at his reflection, trying to take it in. Then he blurted out that it was way bigger than he expected, and instinctively pushed himself out of the chair before the artist had finished pulling the tattoo machine away. Witnesses later told investigators Kieran suddenly pushed himself up from the tattoo chair in obvious surprise while the artist was still working. The tattoo machine briefly dragged across his back before the artist immediately pulled it away. Startled by the sudden pain, Kieran stepped backward without looking where he was going. He caught his foot on the wide metal base of the tattoo chair as he stepped backward. His weight shifted onto his heel, and he tried to regain his balance by reaching for the workstation beside him. But his hand missed. The artist instinctively reached toward him, but was still standing on the opposite side of the chair and couldn't get there in time. Kieran stumbled backward another step before falling onto the hard tile floor. The back of his head struck the corner of a heavy steel workstation that held the studio's tattoo supplies. The impact echoed through the room, and the live stream immediately filled with confused comments as everyone nearby rushed toward him. Several customers later told investigators that Kieran appeared stunned for a moment and tried to move, but he quickly became unresponsive. The artist and another employee called emergency services, while another customer who had first aid training stayed beside him and followed the emergency dispatcher's instructions until paramedics arrived. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported him to the hospital. However, despite emergency treatment, he died later that day. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by a traumatic head injury sustained in the fall. Investigators concluded the fatal injury resulted from Kieran unexpectedly standing up during the tattoo session, losing his footing, and striking the steel workstation. Police found no evidence the donor intended to cause harm, and no charges were filed. The live stream ended moments after the fall and was later removed at his family's request. Afterward, the studio changed its procedures, requiring artists to stop work completely before clients were shown large stencil reveals or allowed to leave the chair. Looking back, what really stuck with Kieran's viewers wasn't the tattoo, but the sheer whiplash of watching a lighthearted stream suddenly spiral into a disaster. It is a brutal reminder of just how thin that line is between internet entertainment and a genuine, real-time emergency. It was May 11, 2017 in Houston, Texas. At the edge of a neighborhood street, there was a large storm drain opening built into the ground, the kind used to carry rainwater away during heavy storms. A warning sign near the entrance said, "Flash flood hazard." On the inside walls, dark water stains reached about 4 to 5 feet high, left behind from previous floods. Grace Boone was 23 years old and ran a vlogging channel built around exploring places most people stayed away from. Her viewers had started calling her out lately, saying her content felt staged and too safe. That criticism got to her. She wanted to prove them wrong, to go somewhere genuinely dangerous and film it without flinching. That day, the storm drain was her answer. Tyler Grant, 24, came with her. He worked in construction and knew enough about drainage systems and flood behavior to understand what that warning sign actually meant. He told her the weather conditions made it a bad idea. The sky was overcast and there was distant thunder, not directly overhead, but close enough to matter. Grace had already made up her mind. I get why she chose the storm drain. It looks raw and impossible to fake, but a camera doesn't make you invincible. It can't save you either. What made this location especially dangerous was something Grace couldn't see from where she was standing. Rain didn't need to be falling directly above them for the drain to flood. Water from storms miles upstream, rainfall they couldn't see or hear from where they stood, was already feeding into the system and building pressure. The high water marks on the walls weren't decoration. They were a record of exactly what this tunnel was capable of. Tyler pointed that out. Grace acknowledged it and went in anyway. They walked about 200 feet inside. The water at that point was shallow, just ankle deep, slow moving, nothing alarming. Grace was filming. The air inside was damp and the walls were covered in a thin layer of slick green algae along the lower sections. Tyler stayed close to the entrance side, keeping his distance from the deeper sections. Then, a low, rumbling sound started somewhere in the tunnel. It was hard to tell where it was coming from. Sound moves strangely inside concrete tunnels, bouncing off the walls and making it difficult to figure out the direction. Grace paused. Tyler recognized it immediately and started moving toward her, telling her they needed to get out. Within about 30 to 60 seconds, the water went from ankle height to knee height, then waist height. The speed of that change is something most people don't expect the first time they experience it. It doesn't creep up slowly, it jumps. The current that came with it was strong enough that standing upright became difficult. Grace turned around to head back toward the entrance. She slipped. The algae on the concrete floor gave her no grip at all, and the current was already pushing hard against her legs. She went down, and the water took her immediately. There was no chance to recover her footing. The current was moving too fast, and the floor offered nothing to push against. Tyler grabbed onto a metal ladder rung set into the wall and reached out toward her as she was carried past. He couldn't get hold of her. She was already moving too fast. That moment, Tyler on the rung, arm out, unable to close the gap, is the kind of thing that stays with the people who live through it. Further inside, the tunnel narrowed. The water, now carrying debris, sticks, plastic, whatever had been sitting in the drain, pushed Grace into that section and pinned her against a metal grate built across the tunnel. The debris piled up around her. The water kept flowing. It didn't stop or slow down. It held her there, continuously pulling her under. Her movements slowed and then stopped. Tyler got himself out and called for help. Emergency responders arrived but couldn't enter the tunnel right away. The water level was still too high and the current too strong for anyone to go in safely. They had to wait for the flow to drop before access was possible. When the water level came down enough, they went in. Grace was found at the grate, still pinned there with debris built up around her. She was recovered and pronounced dead. The cause of death was drowning as a result of the flash flood inside the tunnel. Authorities secured the drain opening and added reinforced signage after the incident. Tyler later gave a full statement to authorities, explaining the sudden surge and confirming how quickly the water rose inside the tunnel. The warning that had been there before wasn't wrong. Just wasn't enough to stop someone who had already decided the risk was worth taking. One of you once commented that proving people wrong isn't worth your life. Watching Grace ignore Tyler's warnings, that line feels like the exact lesson here. It was July 22nd, 2016 in the mountains outside Denver, Colorado. The summer afternoon was clear and warm, with excellent visibility along the winding mountain highways that carved through the Rocky Mountain foothills. Lyra Stone was 28 years old and worked as an insurance adjuster for a regional company, spending her days investigating claims and processing paperwork. But her true passion lay in the mobile gaming phenomenon that had recently taken the world by storm. Lyra regularly spent her free time driving around the Denver metropolitan area to reported Pokemon locations while live streaming her activity to a growing online audience. That afternoon, she received reports from other players about a rare Pokemon spotted in a remote mountain location. Based on the community posts, this particular creature was extremely uncommon in the Colorado area. She quickly started a live stream, documenting her drive toward the reported rare Pokemon spawn in hopes of capturing exclusive footage. As the live stream continued, she drove toward the mountain location while focusing on tracking the reported spawn through the game interface. The live stream footage showed her repeatedly checking the game's location indicator while continuing toward the reported spawn site. As Lyra drove higher into the mountains, the urban landscape gave way to increasingly rugged terrain. The roads became more winding and narrow, with steep drop-offs and challenging curves that required careful attention to navigate safely. However, Lyra's focus remained divided between driving and monitoring her phone screen, where the game's interface displayed the Pokemon's location at close range. The live stream continued recording as she drove through the mountainous terrain, with the footage later showing her frequently shifting attention between the road and her phone. She held her phone in one hand while steering with the other, frequently glancing down at the screen to track the Pokemon's exact position and estimate her arrival time. The section of highway where the accident occurred was particularly challenging, featuring a sharp curve with a steep drop-off on one side and a rock wall on the other. The curve was marked with warning signs indicating a recommended speed of 25 miles per hour. But Lyra was traveling significantly faster while simultaneously trying to interact with her phone to monitor the game's proximity indicator. As she entered the curve, Lyra was looking down at her phone screen, trying to determine whether she needed to stop immediately or continue to a specific location ahead. The on-screen indicator showed the Pokemon's location nearby as the vehicle continued into the curve. At the time she entered the curve, the live stream footage showed the game interface active on her phone screen, and she failed to notice that the curve was sharper than she had anticipated and that her speed was far too high for safe navigation. Lyra's car crossed into the oncoming lane as she failed to turn sharply enough to follow the road's path. She overcorrected when she realized her error, but the vehicle's momentum carried it off the road entirely and over the guardrail. The car plunged down the steep mountainside, tumbling and rolling as it struck rocks and trees during its descent. The live stream continued recording throughout the accident, capturing the sounds of the crash and the destruction of the vehicle before the phone was finally destroyed. Lyra died from multiple traumatic injuries sustained during the vehicle's tumble down the mountainside. The investigation determined that she had been actively using her phone while driving, with the live stream recording providing clear evidence of her distracted driving in the moments before the crash. Skid marks on the highway showed that she had been traveling at excessive speed for the curve, and the vehicle's trajectory confirmed that she had lost control while not paying attention to the road. It was August 21st, 2017, in Savannah, Georgia, a public plaza in the historic district where tourists usually stop for photos and locals pass through on their way to nearby shops. Dana Cutler was 26. She worked freelance in graphic design, and most of her time outside work went into creating lifestyle content online. Simple clips, aesthetic locations, everyday moments made to look effortless once they were on camera. She had a familiar approach to filming. Find a location that looked visually appealing, set the phone up somewhere stable enough, get the shot, then move on. Nothing complicated. If it framed well, she usually didn't question the setup too much. Later that afternoon, she arrived at the plaza while it was still active. People were moving through the open walkways, sitting on benches, and stopping here and there for photos. The whole space is designed to be visually appealing from almost any angle, which is part of why it attracts so much casual filming. Right in the center of the plaza was a decorative swing. Not a real one, a visual feature, basically a prop. The hardware was original, never replaced, and enough tourists had messed around with it over the years that the fittings were already halfway loose. And what did she do? Sat right down and started filming. She set her phone on a small tripod a few feet away and adjusted the framing. Just a quick clip, nothing out of the ordinary for her. At first, everything seemed fine. She started filming and gently rocked back and forth to create movement in the shot. A few people nearby noticed but didn't react much. It just looked like someone using a popular photo spot the way it was often used. The swing was supported by overhead steel cable anchors attached to a decorative frame above the walkway. It wasn't designed for sustained forward and back motion under full body weight. With repeated movement, small amounts of stress began transferring through the same connection points each time the swing shifted. The first few seconds of footage weren't good enough for her. Too static. So she started pumping her legs, getting actual momentum going, not just a gentle rock, full swinging motion. She'd done it at other spots before, and it always looked better on camera. She continued adjusting the movement to get the shot she wanted, without considering how the structure was supported. For a brief moment, there was a small change in balance, a slight shift that might have felt like normal movement. She adjusted her posture without really thinking about it and kept filming. Then, the structure gave way. The upper connection lost stability, the swing dropped unevenly, and she fell forward into the supporting frame before hitting the ground beneath it. The tripod continued recording for a few seconds, but she moved out of frame almost immediately. People nearby reacted within seconds. Some stood from benches, others moved closer, and a few stepped back while calling for help. The atmosphere shifted quickly from normal public activity to confusion once it became clear this wasn't part of a stage setup. Staff from nearby businesses arrived quickly and helped move her away from the structure while emergency services were called. The response was overlapping and uncoordinated, some guiding her out of the swing area, others trying to manage the crowd, and others calling for assistance at the same time. She was conscious at first, but clearly in severe pain, and her condition worsened as time passed. Emergency services arrived shortly after and transported her to a nearby medical facility. She had sustained severe injuries from the fall, including head trauma and internal injuries caused by the impact. She was pronounced dead later that day. A later review of the installation noted that the swing was intended as a decorative public art feature rather than a load-bearing structure designed for repeated motion. Over time, repeated use had placed stress on the upper cable fittings, contributing to gradual loosening that went unnoticed during everyday public activity. There were no restrictions in place preventing interaction, despite the structure not being designed for sustained use. The recording on her phone stopped shortly after the incident began, with earlier footage from the same session, later reviewed during assessment. The incident was classified as an accidental death caused by structural failure during use of a decorative installation beyond its intended design. It was a Sunday afternoon in late August 2016. On the outskirts of Reno, Nevada. The sky was clear, the wind conditions were good, and the drop zone was running its regular weekend schedule when Claudia Volser walked in and decided she had a problem with the way things were being run. Claudia Volser was 39 years old and lived in a mid-sized apartment complex in central Reno. She had built a consumer accountability blog alongside her warehouse career, centered on exposing what she called predatory business practices in the Reno area. It had a loyal readership that engaged regularly with her warnings and recommendations. She had posted about the drop zone twice before that Sunday, once questioning its pricing structure and once suggesting its safety protocols were theater designed to justify charging more. She had come to the drop zone that afternoon with a coworker who had a tandem jump booked. Claudia had no booking, no experience, and no prior exposure to skydiving in any formal capacity. She was there as a spectator. That lasted about 20 minutes. What appears to have irritated her first was the length of the pre-jump instruction her coworker was receiving. She watched the lead instructor walk through the safety briefing and equipment orientation and made it known to the people around her that the whole process was being drawn out unnecessarily. When the instructor moved into the equipment demonstration, she approached him directly and told him he was overcomplicating something that was not that complicated. The instructor redirected her and continued. Claudia did not let it go. The argument that followed was witnessed by several people in the staging area, other jumpers, staff members, and a small group of spectators near the hangar. Witnesses described her as escalating steadily, telling the instructor that his job was not as technical as he was making it out to be, and that the entire operation was designed to extract money from people by making them feel like they needed more preparation than they actually did. The instructor eventually walked away from the conversation entirely. That is when Claudia turned her attention to a younger staff member who had been standing nearby. That shift from the person who would not give her what she wanted to the one who might is something I have seen in almost every story on this channel where someone talks their way into something fatal. The lead instructor had held his ground. The younger staff member was newer, less certain, and had just watched a confrontation he was not equipped to navigate. Claudia told him she had completed AFF training at another drop zone. She had not, and that she just needed to be cleared for a solo jump. The staff member, assuming prior certification and failing to verify it through the system, relented. What should have followed was a complete equipment inspection, a solo jump assessment, an altitude and body position briefing, and a review of both primary and reserve deployment procedures. None of that happened. Claudia was issued a parachute rig that had been repacked earlier that week by a junior rigger. The required inspection and sign-off from a certified senior rigger had not yet been completed. a lapse that should have grounded the equipment. Claudia put the rig on with minimal oversight, was cleared through manifest without her credentials being properly verified, boarded the jump aircraft with a group of experienced jumpers, and said nothing to anyone about her actual experience level. Every checkpoint she skipped was a decision, not an oversight. She exited the aircraft at approximately 10,000 feet. The primary parachute deployed, but entered a line twist configuration that significantly reduced its ability to slow her descent. That kind of malfunction has a practiced response that experienced jumpers train for repeatedly. Claudia had no training. The reserve parachute, her last option, did not deploy correctly, a failure that the subsequent review linked directly to the improper repack. Several people on the ground witnessed the descent and the impact. Staff reached her within moments. There was nothing to be done. The formal review that followed reconstructed the full sequence. The junior staff member who granted her access without verification, the uncertified repack that had never been signed off by a senior rigger, and Claudia's own decision to misrepresent her experience level and walk past every checkpoint the facility had in place. Investigators noted that while multiple failures had contributed, the chain began the moment Claudia lied to someone who was not in a position to push back. She was pronounced dead at the scene from traumatic injuries sustained on impact. The junior staff member faced professional consequences, and the manner of death was ruled accidental. It was November 8, 2017, in Columbus, Ohio, as a quiet suburban neighborhood settled into a cool autumn evening, with most houses dimming their lights while families turned in for the night. Inside a single-family home, activity continued in an upstairs bedroom that had been converted into a filming space. Celine Vaughn was 19 years old, a community college sophomore living at home and working part-time at a craft store. Outside of school, she ran a slime tutorial channel across multiple social platforms, where longer, uninterrupted videos that combined several recipes had recently gained more traction and higher watch time. In an effort to keep up with similar creators and push her content further, she began planning extended filming sessions designed to hold viewer attention for as long as possible, a format that would ultimately require multiple heat-based setups running at the same time. The project required different temperature conditions, so Celine set up multiple workstations throughout her bedroom. Extension cords and power strips supplied electricity to several hot glue guns, while a heavy-duty extension cord ran from a hallway outlet to power one of the electric heating plates used to warm materials. The layout was arranged to support filming and workflow rather than separating heat sources from nearby materials. By 9 p.m., recording had begun. The camera showed several heating devices already operating as Celine moved between stations, keeping multiple mixtures in progress at once. To avoid interrupting the session, some heating equipment remained powered on while she worked elsewhere in the room. As the session extended past 3 hours, the density of equipment became a factor. One heating plate had been placed on a low surface near the bed, beneath a cloth covering used to protect furniture from spills. The plate continued operating without adjustment, while other stations demanded attention. Electrical load increased as multiple devices ran simultaneously through shared power strips. As the filming session continued into its 4th hour, conditions in the room deteriorated. The heating plate near the bed operated continuously, its surface temperature rising beyond what the cloth barrier beneath it could tolerate. Heat transferred into the fabric, which began to discolor and smolder. With no airflow and no interruption to the power source, the smolder progressed to open flame. Fires spread quickly from the cloth to nearby craft paper, packaging, and synthetic materials stored along the wall. Within minutes, flames reached additional electrical cords and plastic components. Melting insulation and burning synthetic materials produced thick, toxic smoke that filled the upper portion of the room. The camera continued recording as visibility dropped. Flames advanced across multiple surfaces and heat intensified rapidly. The primary exit, the bedroom doorway, became obstructed by fire and smoke before effective escape was possible. The confined layout, combined with the amount of combustible material, allowed the fire to grow faster than it could be contained. Fire investigators determined that the blaze originated from an electric heating plate that had been left operating on flammable fabric near the bed. The device had been running unattended for an extended period, allowing heat to build until nearby materials ignited. As the fire spread, additional craft supplies, cords, and synthetic materials fueled rapid flame growth and produced heavy smoke throughout the room. Neighbors noticed smoke coming from an upstairs window and contacted emergency services. Firefighters arrived to find the bedroom heavily damaged, with much of the interior already consumed by fire. A recording device was recovered near the original filming area, and its final footage confirmed that multiple heating devices had been operating at the time the fire began. Celine Vaughn was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was smoke inhalation, with contributing thermal injuries resulting from an accidental residential fire. Investigators found no evidence of equipment malfunction, concluding that the fire was caused by prolonged use of heating equipment during filming and unsafe placement of heat sources near combustible materials. It was the afternoon of July 19, 2016. Beneath an active high-voltage transmission corridor running through open ranch land outside a mid-sized city in Texas. The corridor carried a 345 kilovolt line between two regional power distribution points, supported by a series of lattice steel towers spaced at regular intervals across flat, treeless terrain, accessible by an unpaved service road running alongside the bases. Sid Furling was 38 years old and worked as a substitute science teacher a few days a week. He ran a physics and electricity channel focused on making electrical concepts visible and measurable on camera, with a modest following built around viewers with a general interest in science. He was knowledgeable about basic electrical principles at the consumer level, but treated that foundation as more comprehensive than it was, dismissing corrections from viewers with engineering backgrounds as overcaution rather than expertise. He drove the service road in the weeks before the shoot, identifying a tower with accessible lower infrastructure and a clear sightline for filming. He prepared a tripod camera positioned at a distance and a chest-mounted unit, and scheduled the shoot for a Tuesday afternoon in late July, when sustained high temperatures across the state pushed regional power demand to its highest levels of the year. He arrived in the early afternoon, set up the tripod approximately 30 feet from the base, and began filming at ground level. The field readings were measurable but produced no immediate physical effect. After several minutes, he determined the ground level readings were not visually compelling enough and decided to climb the tower to get his meter closer to the conductors. The tower's lower access ladder started about 8 feet above the ground on the near face of the structure, reachable by stepping onto the first diagonal cross member and pulling up to the ladder base. He climbed to approximately 18 to 20 feet up the tower face. At that height, he remained well below the conductors themselves, which sat at approximately 80 feet at the lowest point of the catenary. Even without direct contact, transmission infrastructure of that voltage presents serious danger to anyone climbing or trespassing on the structure. While he remained well below the energized conductors, he was climbing active transmission infrastructure not designed for public access or demonstration. The structure itself presented a fall hazard independent of the electrical load above. He had been on the ladder for approximately 4 minutes, holding the EMF meter in his right hand and gripping a rung with his left, when the tripod camera recorded him releasing his left-hand grip. He fell from approximately 18 to 20 feet, landing on the dry, compacted ground at the base of the tower. A utility maintenance worker traveling the service road observed a figure on the tower face from roughly 300 feet away and saw him fall before pulling over. The working assessment from the medical review was that he lost his footing, or grip, while climbing active infrastructure and fell. The EMF meter was still recording field data when it was recovered at the scene. Sid was pronounced dead shortly after the utility worker reached him. The cause of death was listed as blunt force injuries sustained in the fall. The tripod camera had captured the full sequence from setup through the fall. The utility company that owned the transmission infrastructure sought and obtained a legal hold on the footage, citing an ongoing liability review, which prevented its public release. The chest-mounted unit was damaged beyond recovery on impact. The case was ruled an accidental death, and the service road access point nearest the tower was subsequently gated and posted with updated no trespassing signage. It was November 11th, 2021. A cold front had settled over rural Vermont, dropping temperatures fast after sundown. Back roads sat empty, tree lines dark against a moonless sky, cell coverage already thin in the hills. Most houses along the main route had their porch lights off for the night. Driving those roads at night felt normal to Owen Michael Castell, 24, who worked as a rideshare driver during the day and live-streamed his night drives to a small, close-knit audience. He was a cautious, methodical person who took pride in keeping his old car clean and reliable, and he often told his viewers he valued his own safety above any content goal. He treated his channel like a group chat, preferring to talk through his worries in his day rather than perform for stunts. It is always the quiet ones, the ones who seem to have their act together, who end up caught in the worst situations. That night, a regular viewer sent in coordinates gathered from an online forum about supposedly haunted roads. The route seemed like any other trip, guiding him along familiar highways until his signal began to drop and his navigation app showed an error warning. Ahead of him lay a narrow, dark dirt road leading deep into the woods, completely unmarked and without a single streetlight. Owen stopped his car and told his chat that the road looked unmaintained, saying he felt it was safer to turn around. His audience immediately pushed back, reminding him that his brand was about finishing the drive to the marked pin. They urged him not to bail, and several people sent in donations tagged with messages calling him a coward and pressuring him to keep going. He sat in the dark for a long moment, hesitant, before finally saying he would do it for them and continuing slowly down the road, unaware that the path had been officially abandoned since a massive storm had washed it out years earlier. The pressure to perform for strangers is a heavy weight, often pushing people to ignore the very instincts that are meant to keep them alive. A few hundred yards into the woods, the road narrowed sharply at a blind curve, where the outer shoulder had eroded around a collapsed drainage culvert. The deep drop-off was hidden by a thick layer of dead leaves. Owen's headlights caught the edge of the washout only a split second before he reached it. He tried to steer away, but the front wheel slid onto the loose shoulder, which gave way under the weight of the car. The vehicle slid sideways and rolled down a 30-foot embankment, landing upside down in a dry, rocky stream bed. The dashboard camera captured the violent spinning and the sound of crushing metal before the car came to rest. For several more seconds, the live stream remained connected, showing the dim interior of the overturned vehicle, dashboard warning lights flashing, and the sound of Owen struggling to breathe. Then, the already weak cellular signal dropped completely and the stream abruptly disconnected. Viewers assumed it was just another connection dropout, with some joking that he had finally driven into a dead zone. Only later, after investigators reviewed the archived live stream, did people realize the final seconds had shown dashboard warning lights flashing inside the overturned car before the signal disappeared. It's unsettling how easily those last few moments looked like nothing more than another technical problem. Owen survived the initial impact, but he was pinned inside by the collapsed dashboard with both legs trapped, his phone unreachable in the footwell. He had suffered multiple rib fractures that collapsed his left lung, and blood began to slowly fill his chest cavity. Overnight, the temperature dropped to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. He stayed alive in the wreckage for several hours, unable to call for help, before the combined effects of internal bleeding and hypothermia became fatal. A hunter walking through the woods the next afternoon noticed broken tree branches along the embankment and discovered the overturned car. He called for help, and emergency responders arrived shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. It is heartbreaking to realize how many hours he spent in the dark waiting for someone to find him, never knowing that his audience had already moved on to the next stream. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by blunt force chest trauma sustained during the rollover, which was then compounded by exposure to the cold. The report noted that the broken ribs had punctured his lung, leading to internal bleeding that would have been survivable had he been rescued within the first hour. The remote location and the lack of cell service meant that help could not reach him in time. The logging road was actually private land that had been unmaintained for years, despite it appearing on outdated digital map services. Shortly after the incident, the property owner installed a heavy locked gate at the entrance, and mapping companies eventually removed the trail from their public databases. We often trust the technology in our pockets more than our own eyes, and sometimes the blind trust is the last mistake we ever make. It was September 12, 2015, in Las Vegas, Nevada. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the industrial district on the outskirts of the city, where abandoned warehouses and empty lots created an urban landscape perfect for extreme sports enthusiasts. Orion Sterling was 24 years old and worked the night shift at a distribution warehouse, loading trucks and managing inventory in the sprawling facility outside the city. His days were free, and he spent them pursuing his passion for parkour and free running, filming elaborate sequences that he posted across multiple social media platforms. Recent videos featuring larger drops and longer jumps had drawn higher engagement, leading him to plan a more extreme sequence designed to stand out from similar parkour content online. He had discovered an abandoned warehouse complex in the industrial district that featured multiple buildings of varying heights, connected by a network of fire escapes, loading docks, and rooftop access points. The layout was perfect for an elaborate parkour sequence that would demonstrate advanced techniques while showcasing the dramatic urban environment. Orion spent several days scouting the complex and planning a route across multiple buildings, ending with a jump from the tallest warehouse to a lower adjacent structure. He recruited 2 roommates to film the sequence from different positions, and on the afternoon of September 12th, they arrived at the site with camera equipment and began setting up under clear, calm weather conditions. The first portion of the planned sequence involved navigating the lower buildings and fire escape systems, moves that were within Orion's established skill level. He completed these elements without visible difficulty as his friends captured the action from multiple angles, producing footage that highlighted both his technique and the industrial setting. The final element of the sequence required Orion to climb to the roof of the tallest warehouse building, approximately 3 stories high, and attempt to jump to the roof of an adjacent structure, approximately 18 to 20 feet away. As Orion prepared for the final stunt, his friends positioned themselves on the ground level to film the jump from below. Footage later showed hesitation among the group as they adjusted their positions and watched the distance between the buildings. Orion proceeded with the attempt without additional setup or safety equipment. Standing at the edge of the warehouse roof, Orion paused briefly before stepping back to begin his approach. The target building was visible across the gap, with no intermediate landing points between the 2 structures. Later review of the footage showed that the distance exceeded any jumps previously documented in his recordings. Orion began his approach run, sprinting across the warehouse roof to build maximum speed before reaching the edge. He launched himself toward the target building with full commitment, extending his body to achieve maximum distance while maintaining proper form for landing. However, his calculations had been flawed, and he had underestimated both the horizontal distance and the vertical drop involved in the jump. The recording captured Orion falling several feet short of the target building and plunging 3 stories to the concrete alley below as his friends witnessed the fall from the ground level. The impact with the concrete surface was devastating, and Orion's body lay motionless in the alley as his friends rushed to reach him. Orion died from massive trauma sustained in the fall, including fatal head and spinal injuries caused by the impact with the concrete surface below. Investigators classified the death as accidental, resulting from an attempted rooftop parkour jump performed during filming. Measurements taken after the incident showed that the horizontal gap between the buildings exceeded 18 feet, placing it at the extreme upper limit of documented parkour jumps and leaving no margin for error. It was August 22nd in 2018 at a riverside forest park along the Silver River in central Florida, an area where invasive rhesus macaques have been documented for decades. The park was open to the public and had signs posted near the areas where wildlife was known to gather. The signs said not to feed the animals and not to get close to them. There were monkeys in this park, macaques, and they were used to people being around. Leah Trench was 26 years old and ran a lifestyle channel online. For a while, her content had been doing well, fashion, daily routines, that kind of thing. But her numbers had been dropping. The idea she had that day was to get close to the monkeys, maybe get one to eat from her hand, and film the whole thing. She wanted her audience to see her as someone fearless and connected with nature. Javier Soto, 31, was her camera operator. He was there to film her. He also told her more than once that getting close to the monkeys was a bad idea. She didn't listen. I've seen creators hit that point where views drop, and suddenly every idea has to be bigger, bolder. Leah's choice shows that some things just aren't worth doing for views. Leah had brought fruit with her. She crouched low, held the fruit out, and locked direct eye contact with one of the macaques, a behavior that can be interpreted as a threat or challenge in primate social cues. The macaque lunged and bit down hard into her forearm. These animals are fast and their teeth are built for gripping. The bite was deep, not a surface scratch. Before she could pull back, a second monkey moved in. It bit her hand and wrist and left several deep scratches across her arm. The wounds bled heavily. She pulled away and dropped the fruit, and the animals moved off. Javier told her she needed to go get medical help right away. Macaque bites carry a high risk of bacterial contamination, including Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and Pastorella. Leah wrapped her arm with something she had with her and said she was fine. She kept filming on and off for the rest of that day. Over the next 3 to 5 days, the arm got worse. The area around the bites swelled up, the skin around the wounds turned red, and the redness started spreading outward. The punctures sealed at the surface while trapping infection underneath, accelerating bacterial growth. The pain got worse instead of better. Leah posted updates during this period. Some of them showed her arm. She framed it as part of the story, something she was pushing through. She did not go to a doctor. By around days 6 to 10, her body had started losing the fight with the infection. A fever set in. She became weak. The infection progressed into sepsis, bacteria entering the bloodstream and triggering systemic inflammation, dropping blood pressure and starving organs of oxygen. At that point, the infection becomes something the body almost cannot handle on its own. She was eventually brought to a hospital after she stopped being responsive enough to take care of herself. Doctors treated her, giving IV antibiotics and fluids, but she was already in septic shock, where circulation collapses and organs begin to fail. The infection had already spread too far by the time she got there. Her condition kept getting worse despite everything that was done. Leah died from the infection. The medical findings were clear. The cause of death was septic shock from untreated deep primate bite infections. The bacteria found was consistent with what is commonly carried by primates. The delay in getting treatment, more than a week, was the key factor in how far the infection spread before anything was done about it. In the aftermath, sections of the river trail were closed, warnings were reinforced, and public health advisories stressed immediate treatment for any primate bite. It was July 19, 2015 in Columbus, Ohio, a quiet residential area on the edge of the city where most afternoons passed without much going on, the kind of neighborhood where nothing really stands out until it does. Shane Lohman was 29 and not working a traditional job at the time. Most of his energy went into a small prank channel he ran online. His content was pretty straightforward. Staged public scenarios designed to look real, just long enough to catch genuine reactions from strangers. Nothing too elaborate at first, but over time, the setups got more convincing, less obvious framing, more reliance on how people would naturally interpret what they were seeing. He had a habit of picking locations that gave him the most natural backdrop. Public parks were a regular choice, enough foot traffic to get reactions, open enough to move around freely, and casual enough that nothing felt out of place until the scenario was already running. On this particular afternoon, he set up in a public park near a residential neighborhood. The concept was simple, a staged chase between him and a second person, looping through the open area near a small pond at the center of the park. A friend operated a second camera from a fixed position about 50 feet away to capture wider reactions from bystanders passing through. The park had light activity, people walking paths, sitting on benches, a few kids moving through the open grass. The pond had a narrow concrete border running along its edge, maybe 2 feet wide, slightly uneven in places where the surface had settled over time. Shane walked it briefly before they started filming, but still chose to run along the edge during the take. So, what could go wrong with a fake chase in a public park? Apparently, quite a bit. Filming started without any issues. Shane moved through the open area at a jog, staying close to the pond's edge to keep the background tight and visually interesting. A few bystanders slowed down to watch, unsure of what they were seeing. Others kept moving but glanced over as they passed. That uncertainty was exactly what the setup was designed to produce. After the first pass, he looped back to reset for a second take. Same pace, same path along the concrete border. His right foot caught an uneven section of the surface, the kind of thing you'd normally notice if you were paying attention, but easy to miss when you're focused on performing for a camera. His footing went out from under him almost instantly. No time to adjust, no time to catch himself. He dropped roughly roughly 3 feet before the left side of his head struck the concrete border with significant force. The impact was immediate. He rolled off the edge and into the shallow water along the bank, coming to rest partially submerged near the pond's edge. The second camera captured the whole thing from 50 feet out. Several bystanders within about 20 to 30 feet of the pond saw it happen in real time. A few of them hesitated at first. The setup had been convincing enough that the line between performance and actual accident wasn't immediately clear. It took a few seconds before people started moving toward him. By the time they reached the water's edge, Shane was face down and unresponsive. Bystanders pulled him out of the shallow water and kept him as stable as possible while emergency services were called. He was transported to a nearby medical facility, but was pronounced dead later that evening. The cause of death was confirmed as severe blunt force head trauma from the fall. Footage from the second camera was reviewed as part of the official assessment and documented the full sequence from setup through impact. The incident was classified as an accidental death and the case was formally closed. It was the night of March 14th, 2016. On a 2-lane highway outside a mid-sized city in Nevada. The road ran flat and straight for nearly 4 miles before curving gradually toward the outskirts of the next town, with no streetlights past the first few hundred yards and minimal traffic after midnight. Mitch Colby was 34 years old and ran a car modification channel that had lost most of its audience and sponsorships following a public controversy 2 years prior. He had been unemployed for 8 months at the time of the incident, having left a store manager position at an auto parts retailer after a dispute with the owner. The car in his garage was a rear-wheel drive coupe he had been building for 3 years and had referenced repeatedly on camera, describing its performance figures and what it was capable of at full throttle on open road. It represented most of what remained of the money the channel had generated during its better years. In the weeks before the incident, he announced a planned night run across several short videos, describing it as a return to the kind of content the channel had originally been built on. The announcement drew more engagement than anything he had posted in months. He drove the route twice in the days prior at normal speed, noting the road surface condition, the absence of traffic at that hour, and the placement of the curve at the far end of the straight. He treated both runs as confirmation that the route was suitable. On the night of the incident, he spent several hours in the garage going over the car before loading his equipment. He mounted a wide-angle camera to the dashboard using a suction bracket he had used on previous drives and positioned a second unit against the rear window using the same method. He left his residence shortly after midnight and drove to the highway entrance at the edge of the city, where the road opened up and the last of the streetlights ended. Conditions were dry, with temperatures in the low 60s and no wind. He pulled onto the highway and accelerated from a near stop at the city limits, bringing the vehicle up through its power band along the straight section. The road ahead was unlit and empty. Based on physical evidence and camera footage recovered from the scene, the vehicle reached an estimated speed of over 110 miles per hour before reaching the curve at the end of the 4-mile straight. The curve required braking and steering input well in advance at that speed. Nevada 2-lane highways in flat desert terrain typically feature gradual curves with advisory speeds posted between 45 and 55 miles per hour, meaning the margin between the posted advisory and the speed Mitch was carrying into the curve was more than double. The dashboard footage showed no braking before the curve. The vehicle crossed into the opposing lane, left the road surface at the outer edge of the curve, traveled across a gravel shoulder, and dropped into a concrete drainage culvert running parallel to the highway. The car struck the near wall of the culvert and came to rest inverted at the base of the channel. A driver traveling in the opposite direction observed the vehicle leave the road and pulled over at the shoulder. A second motorist arriving shortly after observed the car from the road above. Neither witness had a direct sightline to the vehicle before it left the road surface, and both reported the same departure point consistent with what the dashboard footage later confirmed. The dashboard camera survived the impact with partial footage intact, covering the approach and the moment the vehicle crossed the shoulder. The rear unit was destroyed on impact and yielded nothing usable. Mish was found unresponsive by the first witnesses on scene and was pronounced dead shortly after. The cause of death was blunt force trauma sustained from the impact with the culvert wall. The partial dashboard footage was retained by the reviewing authority as part of the evidentiary record and was not released publicly. The case was ruled an accidental death, No other vehicles were involved, and no charges were filed against any other party. The gap in the guardrail at the point where the vehicle left the road was subsequently flagged for repair as part of a routine infrastructure review of that stretch of highway. It was April 3rd, 2018, in Houston, Texas, as a warm, humid spring afternoon settled over a quiet suburban neighborhood, with temperatures climbing toward early summer levels and families beginning their evening routines. Kai Wilde was 21 years old and a student at a local community college, studying communications while living with his parents and younger brother in a modest two-story house. He attended classes in the mornings and spent most afternoons producing content for a growing social media presence. His videos focused on eating challenges and endurance-based stunts, formats that had recently gained higher engagement and longer watch times across multiple platforms. In an effort to push his content further, Kai planned an extreme water consumption challenge inspired by widely publicized radio station contests from the early 2000s. The concept centered on consuming a large volume of water within a limited time frame. On the afternoon of April 3rd, he set up camera equipment in the family kitchen while the house was empty, arranging multiple gallon jugs of water on the counter alongside measuring cups and a timer. The setup was simple and visually clean. Clear plastic containers filled with tap water were positioned within the camera frame. The planned challenge involved consuming approximately 6 liters of water in under 2 hours, an amount that exceeded safe intake thresholds identified in documented cases of water intoxication. Recording began with Kai consuming the first portion of water without visible difficulty. Footage later reviewed showed him continuing the challenge at a steady pace, with no extended breaks between servings. As time passed, the total volume of water consumed increased rapidly, while the body was given little opportunity to process and eliminate the excess fluid. Midway through the recording, Kai continued drinking additional liters in succession. Changes in coordination and speech became visible on camera, consistent with early neurological effects associated with acute water intoxication. Despite these observable changes, the challenge continued uninterrupted. By the later stages of the session, the volume of water consumed had reached levels known to dilute blood sodium concentration at a dangerous rate. Medical literature identifies this condition, acute hyponatremia, as a major risk factor for brain swelling and neurological failure. Footage showed increasing physical instability as the recording progressed toward its final segment. Near the end of the session, Kai consumed the remaining water required to complete the challenge. The cumulative intake overwhelmed the body's ability to maintain electrolyte balance. Excess water entered cells throughout the body, including brain tissue, leading to cerebral edema. As pressure within the skull increased, neurological function rapidly deteriorated. The recording captured Kai collapsing in the kitchen shortly after the final stage of consumption. The camera continued recording as he lost consciousness. No further movement was observed. Emergency responders were later alerted, but by the time medical assistance arrived, Kai could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A subsequent medical examination confirmed severe cerebral edema and critically low sodium levels. The official cause of death was determined to be acute water intoxication, resulting from excessive water consumption over a short period of time. Investigators concluded that Kai had voluntarily consumed approximately 6 liters of water in less than 2 hours during the recording session. The case was classified as an accidental death caused by a dangerous endurance challenge performed for online content. Video evidence documented the progression from initial consumption to collapse, providing a clear timeline of events. The challenge video was never uploaded, but the footage remained as evidence of how a widely underestimated stunt, scaled for views and engagement, became fatal. It was a Saturday morning in late October 2017 in a small town on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. The air was dry, the range was open, and by mid-morning, everything had already gone wrong. Marcy Delvo was 41 years old and lived alone in a single-story home about 2 miles from the gun range that had been her personal enemy for the better part of a year. On top of her part-time work, Marcy ran a local advocacy YouTube channel she had started in early 2016. It was not large, a few hundred subscribers, but it was consistent, She posted videos documenting what she called community negligence, usually targeting local businesses or services she believed were operating without accountability. The gun range had already appeared in 2 of her uploads before that morning, both framing it as a noise hazard that local channels had failed to address. But Marcy had a particular quality that the people around her knew well. She did not let things go. A noise complaint that most people would file once and forget about was, for Marcy, the beginning of a campaign. She had contacted the range ownership multiple times over the course of several months. None of it produced the result she wanted, which was the range shutting down, or, at a minimum, limiting its hours significantly. What I find interesting about Marcy is that she was not entirely wrong about the noise. People who lived near that range had complained before. The difference was that everyone else eventually moved on. Marcy never did. By late 2017, she had convinced herself that showing up in person was the only way anyone would take her seriously. That belief, more than anything else, is what put her there. That morning, she arrived at the range just before 10. It was a Saturday, which meant the place was active. Several shooters were already on the lanes, bags down, running through their sessions. Marcy walked past the entry signage without stopping and made her way toward the main area where the range owner was speaking with a group near the far end. She was not there to listen. She had already decided how the conversation was going to go. The argument that followed was loud enough that multiple people on the range stopped what they were doing. Witnesses later described her as agitated from the moment she arrived, pointing toward the surrounding neighborhood and raising her voice steadily as the owner tried to respond. It went on for several minutes with neither side getting anywhere. That kind of standoff, where the other person just will not hear you, reminds me of something I talked about in an earlier episode. That specific dynamic where someone walks in with a conclusion already formed and treats the conversation as a formality. You cannot reason with that. You can only wait for it to end. What happened next took only a few seconds. At some point during the confrontation, Marcy turned toward a nearby bench where a shooter had set down his range bag between sessions. The bag was unzipped. She reached into it. Witnesses said it looked deliberate, like she was trying to pull the firearm out to make a point about how carelessly weapons were handled on the property. The shooter, whose bag it was, had stepped back from the bench and was standing a few feet away. Nobody had time to react. The firearm was chambered. The moment her grip tightened and her finger slipped inside the trigger guard and pressed the trigger as she pulled it free, it discharged. The shot entered her upper right abdomen. She went down immediately. I think about that a lot. The shooter was right there. The bag was right there. Not a single person in that space expected her to reach in. That is the thing about someone who is fully committed to making a point. They stop calculating risk entirely. Other shooters moved toward her. There was nothing that could be done at that point. Marcy Delvo was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The cause was a single gunshot wound to the upper abdomen, resulting in fatal damage to her liver and the vessels surrounding it. Blood loss was the determining factor. The manner of death was ruled accidental. The shooter faced no charges, given that he had not been in contact with the firearm at the moment it discharged. The range remained open. The case was closed. It was October 14th, 2016, in Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of night where the main streets still had movement, but the side blocks had already gone quiet. Not exactly a safe area once it got late, and most people who lived there knew to keep it moving. Reeve Morrow was 27. He worked part-time at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, mostly loading and unloading freight. Simple, physical work on a steady schedule. Outside of that, most of his attention went into his channel, a small street vlog he'd been running for a little over a year, where he walked through different parts of Atlanta at night, camera in hand, narrating whatever he came across. Empty intersections, dim parking lots, quiet side streets most people wouldn't normally walk through after dark. That was his thing. He didn't have a large audience, a few hundred regular viewers, maybe a bit more depending on the week, but he treated it seriously. He'd invested around $3,800 into his setup, camera body, lenses, stabilizer rig, and he made sure people knew it. He had mentioned a few times on stream that going live made him feel safer, that having people watching would act as a kind of backup if anything went wrong. That belief made him more willing to take risks while filming alone. On October 14th, he was walking a poorly lit block about half a mile from a busier commercial strip. It was close to 11 p.m. The area wasn't empty, but most people were already off the streets. A few passing cars, distant movement at intersections, but long stretches where it was just him and the sound of his own steps. He was filming. As usual, camera up, speaking into it while walking at a steady pace. He'd stop occasionally to glance around, then continue narrating whatever he was seeing. Just another night of content. Nothing that felt different from the ones before it. A few seconds earlier, everything was normal enough that you wouldn't think much of it. Then, two men stepped out from a nearby parking lot and started moving toward him. At first, it wasn't immediate panic, just that quick mental adjustment when you notice people crossing into your path. But they didn't slow down. They closed the distance directly, cutting off the space in front of him. Within seconds, they made it clear what they wanted: the camera bag and the equipment. Instead of putting it down and stepping away, he turned the camera directly toward them, continuing to film and address the live stream even after they told him to stop. That's when one of them grabbed the strap. Reeve kept the camera up, but his voice changed. The steady narration broke into short, uneven phrases, not really talking anymore, more reacting. The live stream was still running, but it didn't feel controlled at that point, just ongoing. That small contact changed everything. Not because it was planned, but because it forced a reaction. Reeve instinctively tightened his grip, not a calculated choice, just reflex. A brief struggle followed. It was short, only a few seconds, but it escalated the situation instantly. The camera dipped during the movement, catching partial angles of the ground and nearby motion rather than anything stable. His voice came through in fragments, then dropped out between movement and distance. During that moment, one of the men reached into his waistband and produced a knife. Reeve was stabbed once in the abdomen. The shift after that was immediate. The attackers backed away and moved off on foot through the side streets without continuing the confrontation. The camera slipped from his hands during the struggle and hit the ground, still recording. The frame was mostly static now, angled toward the pavement, picking up scattered sound and movement, fading into distance. Across the street, a few bystanders noticed the confrontation as it happened. Some reacted immediately by calling emergency services while it was still happening. Others hesitated, not fully sure, until the attackers were already leaving. Only after the street cleared did anyone cross over. By the time they reached him, Reeve was already on the ground. Emergency services arrived shortly after, but his condition was already critical. He was pronounced dead later that night at a nearby medical facility. The cause of death was confirmed as a single stab wound to the abdomen sustained during a robbery attempt that escalated during a brief struggle. The case was treated as a criminal homicide. Despite witness accounts and partial footage from the recording, the individuals involved were not identified, and the case remains open. It was the evening of January 9th, on a ridgeline in the eastern range of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. The area sat roughly 14 miles from the nearest maintained road, accessible only by a Forest Service track that had been closed for 6 weeks by the time he arrived. The ridgeline itself was buried under several feet of accumulated snow, with no foot traffic recorded in the area since late November. Court Vassell was 31 years old and worked part-time at a sporting goods retailer while running a winter survival and backcountry camping channel he had been building for 4 years. The channel was built around a single premise, that he operated without assistance, without a safety handler off camera, and without any outside support during documented outings. He had addressed that framing directly in multiple videos, distinguishing his approach from creators who staged remote scenarios within easy reach of a road or kept a crew out of frame. His audience had internalized that standard and measured each new video against it. The 7-day winter solo had been announced publicly several weeks in advance. In the period between the announcement and his departure, the response had been the strongest the channel had seen in over a year. He posted a gear breakdown video before leaving, reviewing his kit on camera. His sleeping system was rated to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast for the ridgeline that week showed overnight lows between -5 and -15. He noted the gap on camera, framed it as a test of layering and shelter management, and did not adjust the kit. Several viewers with cold weather experience commented on the breakdown video, flagging the sleeping system rating directly. He did not respond and did not change anything before departure. He arranged for a single contact to expect him back at the trailhead closure point by the end of day 7. He carried no communication device beyond a personal locator beacon, which had been visible in the gear breakdown video. He had described it on camera as a last resort, framing its use as something that would end the trip and contradict everything the channel stood for. He reached the Ridgeline camp by early afternoon on day 1 and spent the first hour setting up shelter and filming his introduction. On the morning of day 2, while collecting snow for water melt on a slope above camp, he stepped onto a snow bridge covering buried talus that collapsed beneath him, dropping him several feet and striking his left leg against the rock below. The chest camera captured the fall. He returned to camp without assistance, but his mobility was reduced from that point. The footage showed him assessing the injury inside the shelter, concluding it was not a fracture, and continuing to film. He did not activate the locator beacon. Over the following 2 days, the footage showed him managing the injury while the temperature continued to drop below what his sleeping system could compensate for. Movement around camp slowed. Fuel consumption ran ahead of his supply calculation as he struggled to keep his canister stove functioning in the sustained sub-zero temperatures. By the evening of day 4, he was conserving remaining fuel for water melt rather than cooking. And overnight, shelter temperatures were no longer being maintained at a safe level. The chest camera was last activated on the morning of day 5. The locator beacon was recovered from his unused kit. His contact reported his absence when he failed to return on day 7. The Ridgeline camp was located by a search team on the 4th day of the operation. The approach on foot from the closure point along a snow-covered track, adding significant time to each search day. Court was found inside the shelter. The medical review determined hypothermia as the cause of death. The leg injury had reduced his capacity to generate body heat through movement, and combined with the underrated sleeping system and depleted fuel supply, his core temperature had dropped to a fatal level over the final days of the trip. The chest camera footage corroborated the physical evidence and established that no other parties had been present at any point. The beacon had never been activated. The footage was held in the case record. The case was closed as an accidental death. The gear rating against the recorded forecast, the injury sustained on day 2, and the beacon condition were all entered into the record. The 7-day timeline he had announced publicly and the single contact arrangement he had made before departure were the only reasons the camp was found when it was. No other parties were involved. It was October 14, 2018, in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Ohio. One house on the street stood apart from the rest. The windows were boarded up and yellow crime scene tape was still stretched across the front porch. No officers were around. Their presence had already been withdrawn hours earlier after evidence processing concluded. Elijah Coyle was 27 years old and ran his own online channel where he posted videos about things he said the public wasn't being told. He had a following that liked his no-filter style. He'd gotten warnings from police before for going into places he wasn't supposed to be. To him, that was almost part of the content. That day, he believed the investigation at this house had been wrapped up too fast. He thought they missed something big, and he wanted to be the guy who caught it on camera. I can sense that for Elijah, it wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about proving the official story wrong. He knew if he caught something investigators left behind, he'd be trending overnight. Emil Hale, his 29-year-old camera operator, came with him. Emil was more careful by nature, but he usually went along with what Elijah decided. Monitoring the live stream from a car parked nearby was Dana Ruiz, 25, their editor. She was watching everything in real time through her laptop. When they arrived, Elijah filmed the tape and the boarded up front of the house. He explained to his audience why he thought the police had moved too quickly. Then, he found a window on the side of the house. It already had damage. The frame was cracked, the board over it was loose. He used that to push his way inside. Emil followed. Once they were in, Elijah moved through the house slowly, narrating as he went. He touched door frames, ran his fingers along counters, pointed the camera at areas he claimed were important. Fingerprint smudges were being left on surfaces that investigators had already processed. He didn't seem to think about that. About 12 minutes into the live stream, the back door opened. The door had a damaged latch from an earlier forced entry, allowing it to open without resistance. An adult man stepped inside. He was carrying a backpack and stopped the moment he realized something was wrong. He scanned the room carefully, then began moving forward. I think the moment that man walked in, everything that was going to happen next was already set in motion. Emil felt it immediately. He whispered to Elijah that they needed to leave and began slowly backing toward the front of the house. Elijah didn't move. He lowered his voice, but kept the camera up and kept filming. The hallway between them and the back door was narrow, barely enough for two people to pass side by side. Emil tried to get around Elijah to reach the front exit, but Elijah's position and the camera equipment blocked the path. The man told them to leave. Elijah took a step toward him instead, raising the camera higher. The man gave Elijah a chance to walk away, but he didn't take it. What happens next will make him regret that decision. By that point, the distance between Elijah and the man had closed to less than 3 feet. The attack happened in a sudden, deliberate motion. The man stepped in close and drove a knife upward into Elijah's abdomen, the blade thrusting in below the ribs with force. Elijah's body jerked from the impact as he was physically pushed back into the shelf behind him, knocking items loose as they crashed down around him. Emil lunged forward to grab him, but Elijah was already folding under the shock of being stabbed. Before there was time to react, the man struck again, driving the knife into the side of Elijah's neck. The wound severed major blood vessels, and the blood loss was immediate. Elijah's body and the fallen debris partially blocked the front exit. Emil squeezed past and escaped while the camera stayed live on the floor. Dana heard the confrontation through the stream. She called the police and emergency services right away. Responders arrived at the scene, but by the time they reached Elijah, he was already gone. He was pronounced dead at the house from the 2 penetrating injuries, one to the abdomen, one to the neck. The man who entered the house was later identified as someone connected to the original case that had brought investigators there in the first place. He had returned to retrieve something he had hidden before the investigation began. Responding officers moved through the house and secured the scene. The man attempted to leave through the back of the property after the attack, but didn't get far. Officers located him a short distance away and detained him without further incident. He was taken into custody. Investigators documented what the unauthorized entry had done to the scene. Emil and Dana were not immediately charged, but the possibility of charges for the surviving parties was noted as still under review. The live stream recording was collected as evidence. It was February 8, 2020, in Akron, Ohio. Snow from earlier in the week had melted into slush along the streets, and the apartment building was quiet that evening. Inside one unit, a laptop was set up on a kitchen counter facing a stool. That man was Dennis Marcus Achebe, or everyone called him Denny. 26, a warehouse worker who spent his evenings streaming casual eating videos to about 150 regulars. He wasn't chasing fame. He liked making people laugh, and the small tip jar helped cover rent some months. His humor was quick and self-deprecating, and his audience felt more like a group chat than a fan base. It is easy to forget that behind every username is a person with bills to pay, anxieties to manage, and a quiet hope that someone out there is listening. Years earlier, shrimp had given him hives, nothing worse. He had joked about it once on stream, saying he would die if anyone made him eat shrimp, and everyone laughed and moved on. He figured the reaction was a childhood thing, mild and long gone. We often treat our own health history with a dangerous kind of carelessness, assuming that past warnings no longer apply to our present. That night, bills were overdue, and Denny opened a stream called Chat Picks Dinner. Whatever dish got the most donations, he would order and eat it live. He expected wings or gas station junk food. Instead, a cluster of regulars, remembering his old joke, all chipped in for the same spicy shrimp platter as a bit. The total climbed past what he would need for groceries and half his rent. The internet has a way of turning a person's vulnerabilities into a game, often without anyone realizing that the stakes have become dangerously real. He stared at the number for a long moment. Refunding it meant losing the money. He told Chat he would just try one piece, said the worst case was that he would get itchy, and convinced himself he probably outgrew it anyway. The food arrived 30 minutes later, steam still rising off the shrimp. 2 minutes into eating, he rubbed his mouth, said his lips felt tingly, and blamed the spice. A few minutes after that, he was clearing his throat between bites, laughing that the seasoning was stronger than advertised. By minute 6, his eyes had started to puff, his neck reddening, and his voice dropped into a scratchy half-whisper he tried to play off as part of the joke. Watching someone struggle while they are still trying to maintain the performance is a uniquely painful kind of theater. Some viewers were asking if he was all right, but most people just spammed laughing emojis, telling him to stay in character and keep the show going. The actual warnings got lost in the chat immediately. About 8 minutes in, he couldn't even finish a sentence. He was just wheezing. He grabbed the edge of the counter, trying to pull himself up, and mouthed something no one could make out before he just vanished from the frame. The camera kept rolling, just staring at an empty countertop. Nothing else appeared on screen. The stream stayed live for almost 3 hours. A friend of his saw a screenshot some other creator posted making fun of how swollen Denny's face looked. He tried calling, got nothing, and ended up calling the landlord to check on him. When the landlord got in with a spare key, he found Denny unresponsive on the kitchen floor, with the stream still running right there beside him. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by anaphylaxis from a shrimp allergy. The reaction swelled his airway and tightened his chest, cutting off his oxygen until his heart stopped. No epinephrine was found in the apartment, and no signs of drugs or alcohol were present. Before anyone knew Denny had died, clips of his swollen face were already spreading online as a funny food challenge fail. After local news reported his death a few days later, most of those posts disappeared. By then, the damage had already been done. Our online presence is fleeting and often cruel, but the void left by a life cut short is permanent. It was the evening of June 22, 2017, along a secondary freight rail spur running through a rural stretch of central Georgia. The line connected two small industrial towns, roughly 40 miles apart, passing through open farmland and a series of aging infrastructure crossings with minimal road traffic alongside it after dark. Tate Maskell was 26 years old and worked inconsistent shifts at a warehouse picking facility, taking assignments as they came and rarely holding a full week of work at a time. He had been running a stunt and urban exploration channel for 2 years, building his following around illegal access to active infrastructure. The content was framed around the trespass itself as much as the location, and each video referenced the previous one as a baseline to exceed. He had filmed himself inside drainage tunnels, on highway overpass supports, and on the rooftops of construction sites. In the months before the incident, he had referenced the freight train concept in at least 3 separate videos, describing it as the next logical step in a progression he had been building toward openly. He spent several weeks identifying a stretch of secondary spur track accessible from a back road, visiting the site twice on foot to time train intervals and observe speeds through a gentle curve near the access point. He identified the exterior ladder on the rear of passing boxcars as the intended ride point and confirmed the configuration was consistent across multiple cars. He prepared a chest-mounted camera and a handheld unit he planned to operate with one hand, a setup he had used on previous videos. On the evening of the incident, he drove to the access point after dark, passed through a gap in a perimeter fence where the spur ran close to the back road, and positioned himself beside the track. He waited for a train moving at reduced speed through the curve, grabbed the exterior ladder of a boxcar toward the rear of the consist as it passed, and pulled himself up onto the ladder. The train accelerated after clearing the curve. Secondary freight spurs of this type typically operate at between 40 and 50 miles per hour on straight sections between industrial stops, and the train reached the upper end of that range within the first mile. At that speed, maintaining a stable position on an exterior ladder required continuous grip pressure against the wind resistance pushing against the side of the car. Approximately 2 miles into the ride, the spur passed under an aging overpass carrying a private access road to a grain processing facility on the north side of the line. The overpass had a vertical clearance of approximately 17 feet above the rail surface at its lowest point. Standard boxcar height runs between 15 and 17 feet from the rail to the roof, which placed the exterior ladder on the car's sidewall within that clearance envelope when accounting for a person's body extending above the ladder's topmost rung. Tate was holding the upper rungs of the ladder with his head and shoulders above the roofline of the car as the overpass approached. The underside of the structure made contact with him at head and shoulder level as the car passed beneath it. He was separated from the ladder on impact and came to rest on the rail bed beside the track. A worker at the grain facility had observed a figure on the exterior of the passing train from roughly 200 feet shortly before the overpass and reported it after the train cleared the area. No one witnessed the impact directly. Tate was found on the rail bed by a track maintenance crew the following morning. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and upper body, consistent with a fixed structure strike at speed. The chest camera was recovered at the scene with footage intact up to the moment of impact, Rather than citing evidentiary grounds, the reviewing authority withheld the footage from public release on the basis that it documented a criminal trespass and that releasing it served no purpose in the context of a closed accidental death ruling. No charges were filed against the rail operator, and the case was closed shortly after the review concluded. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July 2016 in a residential neighborhood on the eastern edge of Phoenix, Arizona. The temperature had already pushed past 104 degrees, and most people on the block had the good sense to stay inside. Cora Belson was 38 years old and owned a modest single-story home on a quiet street she had lived on for nearly 6 years. Alongside her bookkeeping work, Cora ran a home and property blog she had been building since 2015. It had grown steadily to a few thousand readers, mostly homeowners interested in renovation and property management. She wrote with authority on everything from landscaping to boundary disputes, and her readers trusted her recommendations. The fence situation with her neighbor had made it into at least one post, framed as a case study in how to handle difficult neighbors on your own terms. Cora was the kind of neighbor who kept a mental log and acted on every item, whose trash can stayed out too long, whose dog wandered too close to her garden, whose fence post leaned 2 inches in the wrong direction. She addressed all of it, directly, and without much patience, for pushback. Her neighbors knew better than to dismiss her complaints. That never went well for anyone. The dispute with the man next door had been building all summer over a section of shared fencing where Cora believed he had made modifications without consulting her. From that point forward, anything connected to that fence was a matter of principle, and she had made that clear to anyone who would listen. So when he noticed a wasp nest on that same fence post in mid-July and told her it was large enough to need a professional, that he had already looked into getting someone out, Cora shut it down immediately. It was her fence, her nest, and her call. He backed off. He had learned by then that pushing back only made things worse. Being given a way out and still rejecting it, not for a better plan, but because it felt like losing, that kind of stubbornness quietly closes off options before you even realize it. She did not call anyone else either. A few days after that conversation, she went into her garage and came back out with an aerosol can she was confident would handle it. Based on what was found at the scene, the can was a general-purpose household lubricant spray, not a wasp or hornet-specific product. It would have done nothing to a colony of that size under any circumstances. She approached the nest with no protective clothing, no gloves, nothing covering her face or neck. That choice alone tells you everything about where her head was that afternoon. She began spraying directly at the nest from close range. The spray did not disperse the colony. What it did was agitate it. Within seconds, the wasps responded. 2 neighbors observed what followed, one from a driveway 2 houses down, and the man next door who had stepped outside at the sound of the commotion. Both described the swarm as immediate and concentrated, targeting her face and neck almost entirely. She stumbled backward onto the lawn within roughly 90 seconds of the first sting. That margin, 90 seconds, is something that genuinely unsettles me. She was on her own property, in broad daylight, with neighbors close enough to see everything, and none of that made any difference once it started. She had no documented history of a diagnosed allergy. But an undetected sensitivity to wasp venom is more common than most people realize, and a concentrated number of stings to the face and throat accelerates anaphylaxis in ways that even a mild underlying sensitivity cannot withstand. Her airway was compromised before anyone reached her. The neighbor next door was the first to get to her. There was nothing he could do by that point. Cora Belson did not survive the afternoon. The cause of death was anaphylactic shock, triggered by multiple wasp stings concentrated around her face and neck, with findings confirming an undiagnosed hypersensitivity to the venom. The incident was ruled accidental. No one else was held responsible, including the neighbor who had already warned her, and the case was closed shortly after. It was March 12, 2017 in Tucson, Arizona, a quiet residential neighborhood where most homes were already settled in for the night and the street stayed mostly empty after dark. Tiara Pruitt was 24. She worked part-time in retail and spent most of her free time creating lifestyle and wellness content online. Her videos were simple: home routines, drink recipes, and trending clean living ideas she came across on social media. Nothing high budget, just her phone, a small setup in her apartment, and whatever was currently circulating online. Over time, she had gotten into a pattern of repeatedly seeing the same kinds of wellness trends across different platforms. Detox drinks, cleanse routines, herbal mixes, often reposted in slightly different formats but always presented the same way: simple, natural, and harmless. The more she engaged with that type of content, the more her feed began to reinforce it. Similar videos would keep appearing from unrelated accounts, repeating the same ideas in slightly different ways. It created a kind of familiarity, where the repetition itself started to feel like validation, even without any clear source behind it. That's kind of how the algorithm works against you without you even noticing. Most of the products she used were ordered online. The listings looked clean and convincing, usually with general descriptions like natural blend or clean supplement formula. There was little detail about manufacturing or testing, and at least one of the supplements she used came from a seller with no verifiable source or safety certification. And why would she? It had good photos and a clean label. She was in her apartment preparing one of those drinks for a video on this day. It was a variation of a detox-style mix she had seen repeated across multiple posts, though the exact instructions were never consistent between sources. The general idea stayed the same: combine powdered supplements, herbal extracts, and an acidic liquid into one drink and use it as part of a daily routine, despite no clear guidance on how those ingredients interacted when taken together. She set her phone on a small stand in her kitchen and started recording, keeping the frame simple with herself at the counter and the ingredients laid out beside her. She adjusted the angle once or twice before starting, making sure it looked clean on camera. Even while filming, she would occasionally pause to re-stir the mixture or recenter the shot, treating it like a routine process she had done many times before. A friend was in the apartment with her while she filmed, sitting nearby and occasionally helping adjust the phone or check the framing. It wasn't treated as anything unusual at the time, just another content session like the ones she had done before. She mixed the ingredients together in a glass, stirring until it looked uniform, and talked through the steps as she filmed. The process itself didn't feel unusual to her, because it followed the same structure as other wellness content she had already made. Around half an hour later, things started to change more noticeably. At first, it was mild discomfort. Nothing immediate or dramatic, just enough that she paused what she was doing and sat down for a moment. The friend with her initially assumed it was something minor, like a reaction that would pass on its own, especially since she was still able to talk and respond normally at that stage. But over the next stretch of time, her condition didn't settle. Instead, she became more visibly unwell and increasingly disoriented, showing signs that something more serious than a mild reaction was developing. Her responses slowed, and she began having difficulty focusing on the conversation. The friend stayed with her and tried to keep her steady, initially waiting for improvement, but becoming increasingly concerned as her condition continued to worsen without any sign of recovery. There was no clear moment where everything changed at once. It was gradual, which made it harder to immediately recognize how serious it was becoming. Eventually, her condition worsened to the point where she was no longer responding normally, and emergency services were called. By the time help arrived, she was already in critical condition. She was transported to a nearby medical facility, but despite treatment, she was later pronounced dead. A subsequent review of the products involved noted inconsistencies in labeling and a lack of clear regulatory verification. One of the supplements was later identified as containing an unverified compound with no established safety data, and the combination she consumed had never been tested for safe use. Nothing flagged it, just a clean page and a 5-star review. The recording from her phone was stopped after the incident was discovered, and earlier footage from the session was later reviewed as part of the investigation. It was July 9, 2017, inside a service building in Las Vegas, Nevada. The area was not open to the public, a back corridor used only by maintenance workers, with metal panels bolted into the lower sections of the wall. One of those panels had a warning label on it. It said the space behind it was dangerous and that only workers with a permit were allowed inside. Erica Vale was 24. She ran an online channel built around getting into places most people had never seen. Locked buildings, restricted rooftops, sealed-off tunnels. Her view counts had been dropping, and she needed something bigger, something no one else had done. That day, she wanted to be the first person to film the inside of a sealed ventilation duct. The warning label was right in front of her when she started removing the screws. To her, that label was probably just part of the shot. One of you once commented, "Some things you don't attempt even if they look cool. Know your limitations and don't tempt your fate." I couldn't agree more. That line nails exactly what Erica missed. Kyle Benton was 26, her cameraman. He wasn't just someone who held a camera. He had actual training in ventilation work and knew what these spaces could do. He told her to stop multiple times before she even touched the panel. She kept going anyway. The opening was about 20 inches wide. Erica went in head first, her shoulders pressed against both sides of the duct right from the start. She crawled forward, maybe 10 to 12 feet in, and the air around her was still and dusty, with barely any flow moving through it. The duct had been part of an older ventilation line that was no longer actively circulating air. The metal walls weren't perfectly even. One section had already started bending inward, damaged from age or weight from above. She breathed out to flatten her chest and push past it. That one moment, choosing to squeeze past a damaged section instead of backing out, was the decision that sealed everything that followed. I don't think she understood what that meant until it was already too late. Further in, the duct split into two directions. She tried to rotate her body to make the turn. That was the moment everything went wrong. Her shoulders and hips shifted diagonally, and the walls held her there. She couldn't go forward. She couldn't go back. And when she tried, the weakened section of metal bent further inward against her chest and sides, adding more pressure with every movement she made. What made it worse was that the more she struggled, the tighter it got. Her body's instinct to fight back was working directly against her. Kyle grabbed her legs and pulled. Nothing moved. He called for help fast, within minutes of her getting stuck. But fast wasn't fast enough for what was already happening inside that duct. 30 to 40 minutes passed. Her breathing got shallower. The metal, pressing against her chest, made it harder to expand her lungs with each breath. Panic burned through what oxygen she had left faster than her body could replace it. Kyle tried to force the metal open with his hands from the outside. The duct didn't give in. It was embedded within a wall cavity, limiting access to only one side, with no tools available to cut through reinforced sections. Her legs, which had been moving near the opening, slowed down. Then she stopped responding to his voice entirely. She was still inside the duct when she lost consciousness. The rescue crew had trouble reaching her. The corridor layout made it hard to navigate, and there was no easy access point built into the system. The duct itself wasn't directly exposed. It ran behind the corridor wall, fully enclosed. So responders had to break through the wall first just to reach the ductwork. They cut directly into the duct from that breach point, took apart a section of it, and pulled her out that way. She had no pulse. She wasn't breathing. She couldn't be revived. The cause of death was chest compression inside a confined space, not a sudden thing. Built slowly over those 30 to 40 minutes as the pressure held her chest in place and her body ran out of the strength to keep fighting it. That detail is the one I find hardest to sit with. It wasn't quick. Time was passing, and Kyle was right there, and still nothing could stop it. The incident was recorded as unauthorized entry into a restricted space. No permit, no safety equipment. Kyle did everything he could, so the outcome wasn't from a lack of effort. How many times have you brushed off advice because you thought you knew better? Erica's choices show just how dangerous it can be to ignore a clear warning. It was a Thursday morning in early March 2017 in a mid-sized neighborhood on the northern edge of Denver, Colorado. The sidewalks were still damp from an overnight frost, and the morning had barely warmed up by the time Denise Gruzdek walked through the front door of a small chiropractic office a few blocks from her home. Denise Gruzdek was 44 years old and worked as an office administrator for a small property management company. Outside of her day job, Denise hosted a small podcast she had. Launched in late 2015, built around the idea that patients who push back got better outcomes than those who simply followed what they were told. It had a few thousand regular listeners by early 2017, and chiropractic care had come up more than once as something she believed the medical community was too quick to dismiss. She had been dealing with chronic neck stiffness for the better part of 2 years. She had seen a general practitioner about it once, received a referral for physical therapy, and dismissed it without a second thought. Physical therapy, in her view, was for people who did not know how to advocate for themselves. She had done her own research and she knew what would fix it. That research consisted almost entirely of videos she had been watching online for several months. Chiropractic adjustment clips, specifically high-velocity cervical manipulations, had become a regular habit. She watched them the way some people watch tutorials, forming opinions and building what she believed was a working understanding of the procedure. By early 2017, she had fully convinced herself that a single aggressive neck adjustment was all she needed and that the only reason she had not gotten one was because no practitioner had been willing to do it properly. That distinction between watching something and understanding it is one that gets people killed more often than I think anyone wants to admit. She booked an appointment at a chiropractic office near her home and arrived with her mind already made up. When the practitioner completed his initial assessment and recommended a conservative course of treatment, starting with soft tissue work and gradual mobilization, Denise rejected it immediately. She told him his approach was too cautious and that her research had already told her what she needed. She was not aggressive about it. She was composed, certain, and completely immovable, which, if anything, is harder to deal with than someone who is just loudly difficult. The practitioner offered alternatives. Denise declined each one. She made it clear she would not be coming back if he was unwilling to perform what she was asking for. He eventually agreed, on the condition that she sign a standard consent form outlining the known risks of the procedure, including, explicitly, the possibility of vascular injury. Denise signed it without reading it and booked a follow-up for the following week. I find it hard to decide which part is worse, that she was warned in writing or that she treated it like a receipt. She returned the next Thursday. The high-velocity cervical manipulation was performed. Within roughly 3 minutes, she told the practitioner she had a sudden and severe headache at the base of her skull. She lost consciousness in the chair shortly after. A receptionist and one other patient in the waiting area heard the commotion and witnessed the immediate aftermath. What had occurred was a vertebral artery dissection, a tear in one of the arteries running along the cervical spine that supplies blood to the brainstem. It is a documented though uncommon complication of high-velocity cervical manipulation, and the brainstem stroke that followed was rapid and irreversible. I think about the consent form whenever a story lands here. She was told it was written down in plain language, and she moved past it without a second thought. The medical examiner determined that Denise died as a result of a brainstem stroke caused by vertebral artery dissection following a high-velocity cervical manipulation. A formal review was conducted, during which the signed consent form and the documented record showing that Denise had explicitly requested the procedure against the practitioner's initial recommendation were entered as central evidence. The practitioner was not charged. It was the morning of April 7, 2018, on a whitewater river running through a narrow canyon in the western part of Oregon. The river had been running well above its normal level for several weeks, following an unusually heavy spring snowmelt, and the water moving through the canyon section that morning was pushing through at a volume significantly beyond what the route carried in a normal season. Reed Bellick was 37 years old and taught shop at a high school in a small river town where he had lived for 6 years. Outside of the school year, he spent most of his time on the water, and he had been filming kayak runs for 3 years on a channel aimed at intermediate paddlers looking to move into more technical whitewater. At school, he was steady and practical, the kind of teacher who emphasized preparation and repetition before attempting anything new. On the river, though, he relied more on instinct and the experience he had built over time, often treating past success as enough reason to move forward without seeking additional input. He had run this particular river twice before, both times in late summer when the water was low and the features in the canyon section were well within his ability. The spring of 2018 gave him that opportunity earlier than expected. Snowmelt across the region had pushed the river to levels that effectively reclassified the canyon section, turning a manageable series of Class 3 drops into something running closer to Class 4 and 5, depending on the feature. He arrived at the put-in alone on a Saturday morning in early April. A laminated advisory had been posted at the put-in noting elevated water levels and recommending against solo runs until conditions dropped. He filmed the sign briefly during his introduction before continuing his setup. He wore a helmet and a personal flotation device, but carried no communication device and left no float plan with anyone on shore. He launched into the current and paddled the first open stretch without difficulty before the canyon walls began closing in around the route. The canyon section started approximately 1.5 miles below the put-in. At normal levels, the route through it was readable, with defined lines and enough recoverable eddies between drops to stop, assess, and reposition as needed. At the water level present that morning, none of that structure existed in the same way. Several of the drops that had distinct hydraulic features at low water had washed out entirely, replaced by continuous, fast-moving water with no clear recovery points between them. Reed ran the first 2 drops without incident. The third was a feature that at normal levels presented as a straightforward pour-over with a clean exit line on the left side of the channel. At the volume running that morning, it had reconfigured into a recirculating hydraulic extending across most of the channel width. From upstream, the left side still appeared to offer the clearest approach, and he committed to that line. The hydraulic stopped the kayak on entry and pulled him into a recirculating cycle below the surface. He was separated from the kayak during the recirculating sequence. His body moved downstream with the current and came to rest against a strainer formed by a downed tree spanning most of the channel approximately 80 feet below the hydraulic. A group of hikers on a trail running above the canyon rim observed a kayak moving through the canyon without a paddler shortly after the drop, and later spotted a figure against the strainer from their position on the trail above. The river was not accessible from the trail at that point, and they had no way to reach him directly. Reed was recovered from the strainer by a water rescue team later that afternoon. The cause of death was drowning following entrapment at a strainer after being flushed out of a recirculating hydraulic. The helmet camera was recovered with the kayak downstream, with footage intact up to the moment he entered the hydraulic. The recording became unusable from that point, and the remainder of the sequence was reconstructed from physical evidence and the hiker accounts above the rim. The advisory at the put-in, the absence of a float plan, and the solo run under those conditions were all entered into the record. The case was ruled an accidental death. Advisory signage at the put-in was later updated to include high water warnings and photographic examples of the canyon section at elevated flow. It was August 15, 2019. Heat sat heavy over the pastures outside Statesville, the kind of humid afternoon that kept cicadas loud in the tree line. A converted barn stood near the family farmhouse, its wide doors open for airflow, a few dog crates stacked along one wall, and a workbench cluttered with training gear near the center. It was the kind of day that felt perfectly normal, which makes what happened next even harder to accept. Barn work was second nature to Casey Wade Renwood, 31, who ran a small rescue and rehabilitation operation from that property. He live-streamed his training sessions to about 900 regulars, building a reputation on patience with fearful, reactive dogs. He believed muzzles were a temporary tool, not a permanent answer, and said so often online. He had no formal bite risk certification, just years of hands-on experience and 2 prior bites he had waved off as part of the trust-building process rather than warnings. He was actually confident, but looking back, I can see that his confidence was just a thin shield against a reality he refused to acknowledge. That week, he was working with Diesel, a concorso recently surrendered after biting a previous handler during a restraint attempt, a detail sitting in shelter paperwork on his own workbench. He had read it before taking the dog in. His plan called for at least 2 weeks of muzzled handling before any hand feeding. By the 3rd session, Diesel seemed calm enough that Casey felt ahead of schedule. He had not changed the written plan. We all want to believe we can skip the safety steps, but the danger doesn't care about our schedules. During that stream, a longtime donor needled him, saying he thought Casey was the trainer who did not need muzzles. Others piled on, accusing him of not trusting his own methods, telling him to either prove it or stop claiming it. Casey argued back for a few minutes, visibly annoyed, before deciding to show them directly. He unclipped Diesel's basket muzzle and reached forward with a treat, weeks ahead of his own protocol. Diesel lunged the instant the muzzle came off. His jaws closed on the inside of Casey's upper arm just above the elbow, and Casey's own reflex to pull back tore the wound wider before the dog let go. He shouted and staggered out of the camera's fixed frame, leaving only the empty center of the barn on screen. A leg slid briefly into view once, months, then disappeared again. Blood started reaching the concrete floor seconds later, dark red pooling near the edge of the shot in slow, rhythmic bursts. Some viewers assumed it was fake, part of a bit. Others thought he had simply ended the stream after getting bitten. One viewer, an emergency room nurse, recognized the spurting pattern as likely arterial and typed repeatedly that someone needed to call for help immediately. No one watching knew his address. The stream stayed live, blood spreading slightly wider across the floor with each passing minute for almost 40 minutes before a friend who had seen the footage called Casey's sister, who lived nearby. She arrived, found him unconscious on the barn floor, and called 911 herself. Paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead at the scene. It is terrifying how many people watched him bleed out, debating whether it was real or just another show. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by a torn brachial artery. The report found Casey lost a fatal amount of blood within minutes of the bite, since no pressure or tourniquet was applied before he lost the strength to help himself. He was a man who thought he knew better than the rules, and that arrogance left him alone when he needed help most. The rescue barn closed permanently. Several regional shelters revised their foster transfer rules afterward, requiring full disclosure of any documented bite history before placing a dog with a volunteer handler. Too many people only learn the importance of safety once they are looking at a tragedy that should have been avoided. It was a Saturday morning in mid-January 2017 in a quiet residential neighborhood on the western edge of Portland, Oregon. The sky was flat and gray the way it gets in January out there, and the streets were mostly empty by the time Petra Windholm sat down at her kitchen counter and started preparing what she had decided would be the centerpiece of her entire wellness philosophy. Petra Windholm was 36 years old and lived with her husband in a mid-century home she had spent years renovating into what she described on her blog as a chemical-free, intentional living space. She worked occasional shifts at a small, natural food store, but her real investment was the wellness blog she had been running since 2014. It was not large by any measurable standard, but it had a loyal readership, and Petra treated it with the seriousness of a full-time occupation. The blog covered what she called ancestral nutrition, a loose philosophy built around the idea that modern food processing had destroyed the nutritional integrity of everything most people ate. She wrote about sourcing, about organic certification, about the dangers of cooking at high temperatures, and what she believed it did to enzymes and nutrients. Her readers trusted her, and she wrote with the kind of confidence that tends to read as authority even when it is not. By late 2016, she had become particularly focused on raw organ meat. Through forums and self-published wellness literature, rather than any clinical source, she had become convinced that raw beef liver was among the most nutrient-dense foods a person could consume, and that cooking it destroyed the very compounds that made it valuable. She began working toward what she planned to present as her most definitive post yet, a raw liver protocol she had developed herself, intended as proof that everything her critics had been saying about food, safety, was nothing more than industry-driven fear. Critics had been vocal for months, including one claiming to be a nutritionist, but Petra dismissed them all, calling their concerns overblown and even removing some of the criticism from her blog entirely. That last part is what gets me. She was not just confident, she was actively cutting out the voices telling her to slow down. She sourced what she believed was a premium grass-fed beef liver from a local supplier and stored it in her refrigerator for 2 days before use. Raw beef liver carries a significant salmonella risk that proper cooking eliminates entirely, but that no amount of sourcing quality can guarantee against. Petra knew the concern existed and had addressed it on her blog before, arguing that organic certification made it irrelevant. It did not. On the morning of January 14th, she prepared and consumed a substantial portion of the liver raw. Her husband was home and later recounted that she had been in good spirits, treating the whole thing as a milestone. Symptoms began within 18 hours, nausea first, then cramping, and a steadily climbing fever. Petra attributed it to what she called a detox response and did not seek any help, telling her husband the same thing she had told her readers for years. that the body knew how to handle itself if you gave it the right inputs. By the third day, she could not keep anything down. Her husband brought her in for care on January 17th. The infection had already progressed significantly. Salmonella was confirmed and her condition continued to deteriorate over the following 2 days despite intervention. Petra Windholm died on January 19th, 2017, 5 days after consuming the raw liver. The cause of death was septic shock, resulting from a severe Salmonella enterica infection, confirmed as originating from the raw beef liver she had prepared at home. Her husband had urged her to seek help 2 days before she agreed to, by which point the infection had already advanced beyond what treatment could reverse. The manner of death was ruled accidental, and the case was concluded without further proceedings. It was March 28, 2016 in Portland, Oregon, a small independent cafe in a walkable neighborhood where weekend mornings usually meant steady foot traffic, low conversation, and the constant sound of machines running behind the counter. Jillian Wick was 22. She was a college student and spent most of her free time outside classes creating lifestyle content online. Her posts were simple: cafe visits, daily routines, short clips meant to look casual and unplanned, even when there was usually a bit more intention behind them than it seemed. She had a habit of filming hands-free. Most of the time, she'd place her phone on whatever surface was nearby and let it record while she moved through the moment. A table, a shelf, the edge of a counter, whatever gave her a usable angle. Stability wasn't something she thought too much about if the framing looked fine on screen. If it looked good on camera, that was the whole checklist. That day, she arrived at the cafe late in the morning. It was already moderately busy. People were seated near the windows, a few standing in line at the counter, and there was that constant mix of cups, conversation, and movement behind the bar. Staff were moving between stations, calling out orders, and handling drinks during a typical rush period. She ordered a drink and shifted closer to the service counter so she could film a short clip while it was being prepared. Nothing about it felt unusual to her. It was the kind of setup she had done before in different places, just trying to capture a quick moment for content. She placed her phone on the edge of the counter, angled toward herself and the preparation area behind the register. It was slightly overhanging, not secured in any way. There wasn't anything unusual about the placement in her mind, just enough to get the framing she wanted. Around her, the counter area was active. Staff were moving between machines, customers were being served, and there was constant motion in and out of the workspace. Nothing chaotic, but enough activity that the space was never fully still. While waiting, she leaned in slightly to check the framing. The phone shifted under the angle, wobbled for a second, and slipped off the edge of the counter. It didn't just fall cleanly into open space. It slid and dropped into the back prep area where customers weren't meant to step in. For a moment, she just looked at it. Staff were nearby but busy, and asking for help meant waiting in the middle of a rush. The decision came quickly. She didn't wait. Instead, she leaned over the counter to reach it herself. No call out, no step back, just a quick movement forward into the staff area. She crossed the boundary of the counter and extended her upper body into a tight workspace filled with equipment, trays, and movement from multiple directions. For a phone. She crossed into an active kitchen workspace. For a phone. As she reached forward, her arm made contact with a large stainless steel coffee urn positioned close to the edge of the prep area. It had been set there temporarily during the rush, close to the edge and not fully secured. The contact didn't immediately topple it. The urn shifted at its base, already unstable from its placement, sliding slightly before losing balance. Once it shifted far enough, the weight distribution changed and it tipped forward. Hot coffee spilled across the counter space in a sudden release, pouring over her upper body in a large volume before she could fully pull back. The reaction around her was immediate but uncoordinated. Staff moved in quickly, some guiding her away from the counter, while others called for emergency help and reached for water at the same time. Customers turned toward the noise as the situation shifted from routine service to confusion in seconds. She stepped back from the counter, visibly in pain. Someone helped guide her into a seated position while cool water was applied as quickly as possible. She was conscious but in severe distress and remained there while staff stayed with her until emergency services arrived. She was transported to a nearby medical facility with extensive burn injuries covering a significant portion of her upper body. Her condition deteriorated over the following days despite treatment, and she was pronounced dead 2 days later from complications related to those injuries. The incident was reviewed and classified as an accidental injury resulting from a chain of events during routine activity in a public service environment. It was March 3, 2015 in Phoenix, Arizona. Despite the city's dry climate where rust forms slowly, years of irrigation runoff leaking onto the billboard's joints had caused unusually severe localized corrosion. At the bottom, there was a sign that said, "No climbing was allowed." Simon West was 30 years old and made videos of himself climbing things: towers, rooftops, construction frames, anything high up. He had a following that watched for the thrill of it, but another creator had just posted a climb of a taller structure, and Simon felt it. That kind of competition hits differently when your whole identity is built around being the one who goes highest. His goal that day was simple: get higher, get the shot, get it out before the moment passed. Nate Collins, 28, was with him on the ground operating a drone to film the climb from the air. Honestly, I get it. Someone uploads a higher climb, and suddenly what you did starts to feel small, and then you start to feel afraid of what might happen next. Before Simon even started going up, the condition of the structure was easy to see. The metal was discolored in patches where rust had been spreading. Some of the bolts holding sections together had corroded badly enough that the damage was visible from the ground. The billboard had also been through recent high winds, and there were stress marks along the joints and slight bends in some of the supports. Simon could see all of this. Nate noticed it too. They went ahead anyway. I've seen this mindset before, thinking a problem applies to everyone but you. What I don't get is Nate saw exactly what Simon saw and still chose to launch the drone. Simon climbed up to the walkway near the top without any immediate problems. The structure held his weight on the way up. He stepped out onto a narrow beam that ran beneath the billboard, the kind of position that would give the drone camera a clean shot of him with the city behind him. He shifted his weight to the side to line up the angle. One bolt gave way first. It didn't make a dramatic sound. Bolts weakened by rust don't always snap loudly. The beam dropped slightly on one side. Simon felt it and tried to shift his weight back to rebalance himself. That adjustment put more stress on the bolts sitting right next to the one that had already failed. They gave way too. The beam dropped further. Simon grabbed for an upright pole running along the side of the structure. For a second, he had something to hold. Then, the metal plate connecting that pole to the rest of the frame tore free. It had been holding on through rust and pressure alone, and it couldn't take the sudden load. That whole section came down. Simon fell about 60 feet. On the way down, he hit a crossbar, a horizontal metal beam at roughly mid-height. That impact alone was severe. He then hit the ground. Nate, watching from below through his drone feed, saw it happen. There was no movement after Simon landed. I don't think there's a version of that fall where the outcome is different. Once that first bolt failed and the rebalancing attempt put more pressure on everything around it, the rest followed quickly. There was no stopping it. Emergency services arrived at the scene. Simon was pronounced dead where he had landed. The combination of the mid-fall impact and the ground impact caused injuries that were not survivable. Structural inspectors went over the billboard afterward. The bolts had been corroding for a long time. Not just surface rust, but deep enough that they had lost most of their holding strength. The recent storm had added stress to joints that were already weak. To me, that's the part that stands out. The structure didn't fail because Simon was unlucky. It failed because it was already broken and nobody had fixed it, but the risk wasn't hidden. Simon had seen the corrosion, the stress damage, and the warning sign, and still chose to climb. The billboard was later removed and inspected after the incident, with officials citing long-term structural neglect compounded by unauthorized access.